All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 2015. I am up to Chapter 23 of 25, which is how to use ASP.NET AJAX. Now, before we go into this, Chapter 5 is entitled Going to the Next Level. There are the last three chapters in the book. This chapter, as mentioned, talks or discusses ASP.NET AJAX. All right. And the last two chapters of the book, they discuss both what are called how to develop WCF or Windows Communication Foundation applications and how to use Web API, another acronym for Application Program Interface applications. Finally, Chapter 25 discusses a concept that's known as MVC, or Model View Controller. Now, this is very interesting for several reasons. One of the reasons is I've talked with Evan Gudmested, who is the Assistant Program Chair and also teaches this class over at the St. Louis campus. And Evan, hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn here, Evan has mentioned that what he can see the class, the ASP.NET or .NET with web databases class, the AWD1111, which is what this class is he can see this class eventually morphing into a class that more than anything else discusses Model View Controller. So Model View Controller, which again is the subject of Chapter 25, the last chapter in this book, is perhaps among the most important chapters in the book. So I will go over it. This particular lecture for this chapter will probably consist of 2 or at most 3 different videos, but I would guess 2, I don't know. We'll see. And the next chapter, Chapter 24, will also be 2 or 3, but the last chapter will be several more. All right? So, let's get to it and start talking. Tell you what, I've got a phone call, so let me pause for just a moment. All right, sorry about that. So, we're into Chapter 23 on how to use ASP.NET AJAX. Our objectives, we have one applied objective: use the ASP.NET AJAX server controls to develop AJAX applications with ASP.NET. In general terms, describe the way AJAX works, including the use of the XML HTTP request object. In general terms, describe the ASP.NET AJAX client-side framework and the ASP.NET AJAX controls. And finally, describe the use of the AJAX script manager, update panel, update progress, and timer controls. So, before we even go into this, I'm going to break away for a minute and talk about a few other things. Back in 2005, there was a gentleman named Jesse James Garrett who wrote pretty much at the time, which was a kind of an evolutionary article, and it's shown on the screen here, called AJAX, A New Approach to Web Applications. And the main reason that this became, I'm calling evolutionary as opposed to revolutionary, is it was a new way of looking at things. For example, the idea was, and today we take this for granted, that if I want to look, if I'm in Google here and I type in an A, what happens? Well, when you look right there, you can see that Google Suggest takes over. And it says, oh, you've got stuff that starts with an A. When I go to J, notice it automatically goes to AJAX. All right, there's other things also. If I go to again, you can see how it's changed. And if I go again, you can see how it's changed. All right, this is Google Suggest, and what it's doing is it's refreshing this part of the page right here as I'm entering in additional information. you probably have seen the same kind of thing, not exactly the same, but if I'm using Google Maps and if I'm here and I start to zoom out or I zoom in, it's not redrawing the entire screen, it's just redrawing the portion of the screen that needs to be redrawn. Well, what AJAX is, it's actually an acronym that in the past has stood for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Today, it pretty much stands on its own because much of the AJAX work that's done today does not use XML. Rather, it uses JSON, which is JavaScript object notation. That aside, the idea behind AJAX is that you can do what are referred to as partial page refreshes. So you only refresh the piece of the page that needs to be refreshed. The key to using this was something that, believe it or not, Microsoft provides, that's called the XML HTTP request object that wasn't used for very much. But starting here, the idea was that would be used to allow for more dynamic display and interaction. Again, I would strongly suggest you have a read of this. You can look up, I Googled Jesse James Garrett AJAX article, and it came up. The other thing is, if you do want to take a look, if you can't read this very well or whatever, it's right there. So it's at http://adaptivepath.org/ideas/AJAX -new-approach-web-applications/. All right. Now, I used to always show this in here. Okay, so let's see. I don't know if it's going to allow me to do this anymore. I guess it doesn't. Family Video and a lot of these other places are constantly changing. It used to be where you could take your mouse and put it over this, and it would show you a description of a movie. And notice it's not doing that anymore, all right, for whatever reason. But in the past, you were able to do that and go out and get a description of what the movie was about, all right? And the reason that that was kind of important was you saw the partial page refresh. Now, there is a little bit of a refresh going on here. Notice when I come here and I highlight, for example, this XXX, I get the box drawn around it, I get an add to cart button, I get an add to wish list, and I get an add to compare. All right? So it is doing somewhat of a partial page refresh there. All right, you can go out and you can go and Google AJAX or look under AJAX or asynchronous JavaScript and XML under wikipedia.org and get a lot more information if you're so inclined. So again, they say their Netflix popular feature. I didn't see that, but I'm not a member of Netflix, so that might be why I didn't see it. But if you notice, the idea is if you take your mouse and you put it here, you get this bubble that comes up. And that bubble that comes up is all information about the Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 2. If you get off, the bubble disappears. All right. So, going along with that, as mentioned here, the idea that kind of brought this all across was a desire to make web applications look, act, and feel more like desktop applications. Desktop applications the idea is they've got a more constant, common look and feel. And when you create an application that's displayed in a web browser, they're referred to as RIA, or Rich Internet Applications. One way to build an ARA is to use, again, AJAX. Unlike normal HTTP requests, AJAX lets you receive data from a web server without reloading the page. It allows you to do what's called a partial page refresh. One of the reasons that this is so important is, again, it is a new way of doing things. So they show here on the top part of the slide how a normal HTTP request is processed. We've talked about this before, the request response type of architecture. So when a web browser sends a normal HTTP request to a web server, the server returns an HTTP response that contains the content to be displayed for the page. Whether the content is static, all right, meaning that typically it ends in a .html extension, or dynamic, where it ends in a .php or a .aspx or a .jsp extension. Once the page is returned, the connection to the server is closed. Even if the state is maintained via session variables or cookies, a full HTTP request and response cycle must take place again to update the page. That's what's shown in this first diagram. In contrast, AJAX can update the web page after it's loaded without having to perform a full HTTP request and response. The browser initiates a request that sends only the data that's needed by the server to respond to the request. Then, when the server sends the response back to the browser can use the data in the response to update just the part of the page that needs to be updated. You'll notice that rather than an HTTP request, we've got an XML HTTP request. Now, all modern browsers provide for an XML HTTP request object, also known as an XHR object. That's what's used to send an asynchronous request to the web server and to receive return data from the server. In addition to this, JavaScript is used in the browser to issue the request, to parse the return data, and to modify the page to reflect the return data. So, how AJAX updates the contents of a web page. This is taken right directly from figure 23.2 on page 807. Again, some kind of an event happens. This event triggers the JavaScript code that's associated with the event. JavaScript prepares a request and uses this XML HTTP request or XHR object to send it to the web server. The request contains information about the event and the current state of the controls on the web page. The server then receives the data, processes the data, and sends a response back to the browser. The key takeaway there, as is noted at the end of step 3, is the response contains the updated state of the file, of the controls rather, on the web page. Finally, JavaScript parses the response and uses the data it contains to update the contents of the web page. The browser then updates the user screen. But again, the idea is it only updates the part of the screen that indeed needs to be updated. The architecture of ASP.NET AJAX is shown here. So this started back with ASP.NET 3.5 in Microsoft Visual Studio 2008. So this is not something that's new, but it is something that is constantly being refined over time. So we've seen in earlier chapters the standard HTTP request and response cycle that's triggered by an event on an ASP.NET web page that's known as a postback. All right. When a postback occurs, the view state of the controls on the page, the view state is sent to the server as part of the request. Then the server processes the request. It updates the view state as necessary and sends a response back to the browser. You can contrast that with ASP.NET AJAX, which enables what's known as an asynchronous postback. It's similar to a standard postback in that the view state of the controllers on the page is sent to the server in response to an event on the page. However, with an asynchronous postback, the XML HTTP request or XHR object is used to send the view state data to the server. Then the response that's returned by the server is used to update the controls on the page without having to reload the entire page. In other words, it is what's referred to as a partial page refresh. Now, the three components that make this work are the AJAX or ASP.NET AJAX client-side framework, and that is a JavaScript library that's loaded by the web browser when the AJAX-enabled ASP.NET page is displayed. We've got what that does is it allows JavaScript code to interact with the ASP.NET application server through the XHR object. Next, we've got the ASP.NET AJAX server controls. There's 5 basic controls that this works with. They are the script manager proxy, the update panel, the update progress control, and the timer control, which we will look at shortly. Finally, you've got the ASP.NET AJAX control toolkit. This is an open source project from Codeplex, and we're going to have to look at that in just a minute, that provides more than 40 ASP.NET controls that you can use to build AJAX-enabled applications. Now, these 5 controls are shown on pages 810 and 811 of our textbook. We first have the script manager control, which enables the use of other ASP.NET AJAX controls. It's kind of a holder, all right? It loads the ASP.NET AJAX client-side framework, and it manages the client-side JavaScript code. But you can only have one script manager per page. So oftentimes, you will, if you're having a setup, as we talked about in a much earlier chapter, like chapter 7 or 8, whatever the heck it was, and I'm just checking for my own edification. Chapter 9, when we talked about master pages. You oftentimes put the script manager in your master page. But if you do that, you can't include new script managers on any of the other pages. However, on any other pages, you can create one or more script manager proxy controls, which extends the scripting services provided by the script manager control. We have the update panel, which identifies a list of server controls to be updated using an asynchronous postback, an update progress control, which provides visual feedback as the update is in progress, and a timer control, which triggers an asynchronous postback on an update panel control. So again, the script manager control, only one per page. If you put it on a master page, you can't have additional ones on a content page. If there's more than one script manager control on a page, you'll get an invalid operation exception generated. The script manager control is oftentimes used to load and manage additional JavaScript files and to register web services, which we talk about in the next chapter. The script manager proxy control allows you to augment or kind of add to the script manager control, allowing you to load extra JavaScript files and register extra web services. It can be used in a content page if the master control or master page has a script manager control, and it's also possible to have more than one script manager proxy on the same page. The update panel control is a container control that holds other server controls that are updated during the asynchronous postback. All the controls inside of the update panel control are updated at the same time. The page can have multiple update panel controls, and each of these panels can have their own different controls. The update progress control again provides a visual indicator that an or asynchronous postback is in progress. So if you're doing something and you want to let the user know to stop, kind of like the old-fashioned timer control that you used to see when you were doing different Microsoft operations. Then the user will know to wait until the postback completes before doing anything else on the page. Finally, again, there's the timer control. So when one or more update panel controls need to be updated automatically, you can use the timer control to trigger partial page updates at a certain time interval. Now, this is what's interesting here. All right? The ASP.NET AJAX Control Toolkit provides more dynamic, visually appealing user interface controls or control extension. Well, what the heck does that mean? What that means is, by default, if I come in here, and I don't even know if I have anything for Chapter 22, if there is any kind of an application in here. Let me check. So we didn't have any for 20 or for, okay. But if I bring up this app, for example, for Chapter 20, I'm not going to do anything with this app. I just want to show you something. That is, that if I come back into here, let me go back to, let me bring up one of my ASPX files, and let's go to design mode. All right, we'll bring up our toolbox here. All right, what I want to show you is if instead of our Server Explorer, we view our toolbox here, all right, that by default, when I go to AJAX extension, all that's here are those 5 controls. The Script Manager, which we talked about, the Script Manager Proxy, which we talked about, the Timer, which we talked about, the Update Panel, which we talked about, and the Update Progress, which we talked about. And you'll note they're in alphabetic order. If we want to be able to add additional ASP.NET AJAX controls, we can. And we do that by going out to devexpress.com/products/ajax-control-toolkit. I don't believe that's case sensitive. All right, there it is. This is an open source project that's hosted by DevExpress that you can download and use for free. So I would just click the download button. What's shown in your textbook here are some of the most common controls that you would download from there. These controls extend the functions of the other ASP.NET controls. I didn't say the other ASP.NET AJAX controls, I mean the other controls. For example, the calendar extension extends the function of the text box control. The toolkit currently contains over 50 controls and control extensions, and more are updated all the time. This toolkit is not part of the official ASP.NET itself. It's an open source project that's a joint effort between Microsoft and Codeplex, which is now maintained by DevExpress. And it's interesting because in the last version of this text, rather than having you go to devexpress.com, I would have had you go out to Codeplex. All right, and you would have gotten the information from there. But as it says, Codeplex is shutting down. So I went to that article that's there from Brian Harry's blog, and it says, after almost 11 years, it's time to say goodbye. We launched Codeplex in 2006 because we, like others in the industry, saw a need for a great place to share software. All right, we've migrated to, as you know, Microsoft has invested in Visual Studio, etc., la 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 la. Over the past years, we've watched many Codeplex projects migrate. During the same period, we've had to address several issues. So as it says, it's time to say goodbye to CodePlex. At this point, we've disabled the ability to create new CodePlex projects. We are shutting it down completely at the end of December 2017. We'll take a final complete backup of the site before shutting it down and decommission the existing CodePlex website. At that time, CodePlex will be serving basically what's out there. Just, the idea is, it says there we provided 2 first-class ways to get your data out of CodePlex. First, we partnered with GitHub to provide a way to bring your CodePlex source code live. Second, the CodePlex archive allows you to download an archive file. So that's what they have. All right? But basically, it's been replaced now by going over to this DevExpress Ajax control toolkit, which again, you can download and bring into your project. Among the things that will be there are what are shown here. All right? And they include the accordion to contain multiple panes of content with only one at a time, like a typical accordion. Animation to change position, size, opacity, and color of a control. Calendar to show a calendar pop-up for data entry. Collapsible panel, which is a one-click hide and show for a control. Drag panel, which allows you to drag a panel of content around on a page. Hover menu, which displays kind of a pop-up menu when you hover over a control. Modal pop-up, which displays a modal pop-up control that hides the page until you select an option. Numeric up-down, which shows an up-down keys, like if, again, you've seen this before when I do this, Control P, there's an up-down, sometimes called a spinner control also. A pop-up control to add or hide a set of controls that are displayed in a pop-up window. Rounded corners. Slider to give you a draggable slider. Slide show to show multiple images in one image tag. A tab container / tab panel to show multiple panes of content in a tab format. All right, next we discuss how to go in and use these controls. So we will talk about how to use the script manager, and then how to use the update panel, and then the timer, and then the update progress controls. I will put that into the next video. After that, we've got an application that uses ASP.NET Ajax, and that will be the last video. So we'll have 3 videos for this chapter, and I have just completed video number 1.